Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the ego and its matrix. With me is Cate Montana, who has a 30-year career in journalism. She is the author of a number of books, including Unearthing Venus, My Search for the Woman Within, The Heart of the Matter, Ghetto Physics, and most recently, the E word, Ego, Enlightenment and Other Essentials. She also served for 3 years as editor of the Bleeping Herald, the newsletter for fans of the popular movie What the Bleep. Welcome, Cate.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Really good to be here.
It's good to be with you, too. A pleasure to be with you, in fact. I enjoyed your, I guess I'm going to call it cheeky. You have a very cheeky approach to a very serious topic. You know, psychoanalysts have written large volumes of books like that about the ego, but you seem to have been able to approach it in a way that's accessible to people. And
thank you.
You're very welcome. And one of the metaphors that you use, which I think is especially interesting, is based on the film series The Matrix.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what the matrix, the matrix of the ego, what that means to you.
I didn't really relate it to that until I was in the midst of writing the book, The E Word. In December 2014, Spirit just kind of punted me onto the field and said, "You will write what you know about the ego and enlightenment." And I'm like, oh God. To try to describe what the ego is like trying to explain to a fish what water is. Mm-hmm. So I was on the constant lookout for analogies and visualizations that people could wrap their head around to get some sort of handle on it. Plus the fact it's incredibly accurate to say that we live in a thought matrix that truly is ultimately an illusion. Yeah. The mystics for thousands of years, they have it absolutely right. But it's not the fact that we live in a dream per se, or an illusion as in it doesn't exist. Yeah. The illusion is that we are isolated standalone units called human beings, or egos, personas, personalities. The illusion is that we are isolated. The illusion is that we stand alone. We are one thing. We are consciousness.
Some people have suggested that we live in a prison of our own thoughts.
Oh, no truer words have ever been spoken. There's no greater release, relief, joy, peace, to be relieved of your own identity, not your mind, because the mind is a tool. Yeah. And personal identity, the ego, I've come to understand, it's a tool. There's a lot of talk, especially in spiritual circles, that the ego is bad and wrong. We need to destroy the ego. We need to blow it up. We need to dissolve it. We need to just get rid of that sucker. Yeah. And it's not going to happen. The ego is a very practical tool. It's a structure. If you had to ask me, Cate, what is the ego? In my understanding, it's simply our sense of personal self. And then there's all these stories that go along with who I think I am. If you ask me, I'll say, hi, I'm Cate Montana. I'm a writer. I'm a woman. I'm this age. I'm this ethnic persuasion, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I've just introduced myself. Yeah. I have just told you the story. But stories in and of themselves are just simply stories, and they reside in our minds.
And we all have a story.
And we all have a story, unless we're amnesiacs. So it's a beautiful thing having an ego. It gives us boundaries. It enables me to have a conversation with you. And if I'm going to vault straight into quantum physics momentarily here, or the realm of the mystic that says all is one, and the one thing is the quantum sea of information energy, the boundless waves of interconnecting, borderless energy that is called source intelligence, or the creative, the is, God, whatever you want to call it. Well, if I'm totally undifferentiated and I'm just floating in this boundless sea of isness, I can't have a talk with you.
It'd be very hard to tie your shoes.
It'd be impossible to tie your shoes, and I couldn't differentiate myself from the bus coming down the road at 45 miles an hour. So it would be a short-lived experience.
So there's a sense in which the ego has real survival value for the organism.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's an inevitable construct. We can't dodge this particular bullet. And we don't want to. The problem with the ego is not that we have an ego. It's that we don't know what the ego is. We don't know how to manage it. And we're not in touch with who we really are underneath the stories in our own mind, underneath that persona.
We're dealing with such an intangible. And there's so many words. For example, many people would distinguish between the ego and the self. I don't think you do particularly.
No, I don't. It's hard to explain. Again, mystics have been, so how many people feel the elephant, with their eyes closed and then try to describe what the elephant is? Good luck with that. So it's the same thing. Once one has dissolved the sense of individual separate existence called the self, the personal self, then there is awareness of all existence, of life. Unbounded, unboundaried, borderless, limitless, and it's not personal. So that's, for lack of better words, the higher self, the real self. But and we can't avoid having language like that, Jeffrey, because how else are we going to talk about it? Well, it's not me self. I don't want to confuse what I'm talking about with Cate Montana, that little I. Oh, it's the big I. So we're always in a frame of reference that takes us back to the physical origin of the body, physical origin of the ego, and thus the physical origin of our languaging. We're always talking in these dualistic terms because that's how life is. It's dualistic.
Well, we are biological beings.
We are biological beings.
The fundamental of every biological organism is that there's a membrane. There's an inside and an outside.
Right.
And so that's part of our biology.
Yes. Absolutely.
No question about that. And I think the development, the evolution of the ego is clearly it's related to that.
Oh, the ego comes from our physical structure. It took me years of deep, deep contemplation to wrap my head around what the ego was and who I thought I was, and then where the hell did it come from? How does it arise? How is it formed? And I realized that the ego structure comes into existence at the very moment of our birth, when we are catapulted out of the birth canal into this amazing physical, radically physical experience, and sight and sound and sense and taste, and the little baby is overwhelmed with light and rough and dry and hot and cold, and oh my God. So the very first message we get coming into these bodies is, I am physical. 11 million bits of sensory data a second are barraging your brain right now, and my brain, and everybody's brain, giving us the message, I am a physical standalone unit called a human being, and I have a skin boundary, and I'm not you, and you're not me, and you're over there, and I'm over here. And that's the message. We can't avoid that. We don't realize, however, how critical it is to grasp that so that we can get a sense that, oh, well, that's the message I get, but is that really the truth? The second message we get is, I am separate. Our body gives us that.
Yeah.
The little baby, it's not its mommy and daddy, and it's pre-verbal, it's unconscious. It realizes that, oh my God, mommy and daddy are out there, and the bottle's out there, and the breast and the milk I want is out there. It's all pre-verbal and unconscious, but this message 24/7, all of our lives, Jeffrey, I am physical, I am separate. Well, what does that create? That creates a sense of I am alone in time-space.
And that things that are outside of me are potentially quite dangerous.
Absolutely.
Threatening.
They're not me.
Yeah.
They're either threatening, I'm vulnerable physically, I'm vulnerable mentally, emotionally. I have to somehow manipulate the environment to get what I want, to survive, for sheer survival. So those two messages, I am physical and I am separate, those form the root of the ego. And then we learn language. You know, your mommy and daddy just said, Jeffrey. You know, your little baby brain didn't know. It was just noise. Jeffrey. And, but one day, around 12 months of age, your baby brain went, click. Oh my God, that's my name. Now it's pre-verbal, so it's unconscious.
And at some point, I actually thought, it's me. I am Jeffrey.
I am Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Because the sound, the syllables, Jeffrey, got hooked up in your brain to this unconscious, I've got a skin boundary, I can see that I'm me and I'm not my blanket, I'm not my teddy bear, I'm not my mommy, daddy. Oh, Jeffrey gets hooked up to this unconscious sense of separation, separate self. And from there on, we learn that we're male, we're female, that we're white-skinned, we're dark-skinned, that we go to a Islamic temple, or we go we pray to Jehovah, who knows, or that we're atheists. Then we learn our socioeconomic situation, and then we have this story. And it's all built on that one unescapable message, I am physical, I am separate, and therefore vulnerable.
Now, when you invoke the great movie trilogy, The Matrix, you're suggesting that all of these ideas we develop about ourselves serve to hide our true nature.
Yes, they do. The best way, I really should have brought a prop on stage, but I can use this. The best way to really understand who we are is if this little shawl is all of existence. This is all of creation. Let's just pretend.
Okay.
And so here's Alpha Centauri, and here's the Earth, and here's the Eiffel Tower, and here's you, and here's me, and here's Donald Trump, and here's my dog. Everything is really appearing out of the fabric of consciousness, source intelligence, God, quantum physics, the undifferentiated sea of quantum reality, whatever you want to call it. But
now, some people viewing this video right now, not most of my viewers, but some, are going to say, she's crazy. What is she talking about?
Well, science has finally come along after thousands of years and proved what the mystics have been saying for thousands of years.
I know you wrote that in your book, but because I interview many scientists, I think it's fair to say that what you're saying is true for many great scientists, but probably for the majority of workaday scientists, they don't buy that.
No, they don't. It is really astounding to me, quite frankly, Jeffrey, that after 100 years of investigation into the quantum realm and science absolutely knowing that this may look real, but there's really nothing physical about this at all, that it is quarks and muons and tauons and particles. I mean, look at our language. We even call it, these are particles. Well, what does your mind think of when you think of particles? A little grain of something.
Yeah, a little billiard ball.
A little billiard ball, something. Because that's the only way we can think. Remember, we come in, one message, I am physical, I am separate. So we talk in these terms, we language in these terms, we think in these terms. We don't think of the quantum sea, of course not. I don't see the quantum sea. I see you over there and me over here. I think in terms of particles and billiard balls. So, but the underlying truth is that there's nothing physical about this at all. So that was the whole message of the Matrix.
That
the underlying
is
truth.
Very, very profound thought.
It is.
It's very easy for people to say, oh yeah, of course. And many people who have studied the spiritual mystical traditions would say, oh yeah, of course. But to really grasp that idea takes some work. And it took you, as I know from reading your book, decades.
Yes, it did. Mm-hmm. It did. But it's really important that we begin to think this way. Mm-hmm. And as I said, I am surprised after 100 years, this kind of awareness still has not filtered down into some scientific arenas, let alone the common, ordinary Joe, whoever on the street. We have this amazing understanding that physics, science has proved what Jesus and Buddha and all the great mystics of all time have said. We are one. Chief Seattle, or actually he's Chief Self, what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. Mm-hmm. This mystic, shamanic understanding has tremendous scientific backing. So we need to start, as we get into technologically advancing, we have to start advancing and evolving the ego. So that we begin to think in terms of unification rather than separation, and therefore fear. You write about people who you know, or people who are sort of models of most everybody, successful people who have achieved just about everything that one expects to achieve in a successful life. Right. Family, health, a nice home, lots of toys, car, all of those things, and yet they're deeply unhappy. Something's missing. Absolutely. You've experienced that yourself. I hit the wall at 30. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was successful, TV career, married, had swimming pool, the foreign car, good money. All the things that the ego seems to want to acquire for its own enjoyment and even self-glorification. Absolutely, because what else does the ego know? I am physical. I am separate. I need to protect and take care of myself. Mm-hmm. And to do that, I need to acquire certain things so that I can survive, and then beyond survive, thrive and live well. And as the ego evolves, it goes through, there are people like Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist, the great transpersonal psychologist, who have outlined that the ego actually does expand and evolve. The isolated ego that thinks it's vulnerable because it only can think in terms of not the wholeness, not the blanket. It doesn't see any connection between itself and others. And it's all about self, protecting self, building up a wealth model, building up those castle walls so that I am safe, and then looking good, having stuff so that I can feel good about me. Cate Montana, look at me, I'm amazing. And we are so insecure because of that separation and that vulnerable place, physical base we come from, but it's unconscious. And it seems as if I get your meaning, that many of the extraordinary social problems that we're facing, the degradation of the environment, the fact that half the world is overweight and the other half is underfed, all of these things are a result of fundamentally people not understanding who they really are. Yes. And how the ego operates. What it is, what it isn't. It's a tool. It enables us to engage this beautiful world. But if it's unaware of itself as a tool and unaware of any underlying greater connection, then it's a tool out of control. It's the tool running the show. That's the difference between an ego that has not evolved, that still has not really tapped into any sort of empathic, compassionate beginning of understanding that we really are all one, and is afraid to be vulnerable, versus a man who has gone the distance, who has moved into that compassionate, empathic realm where he understands that he bleeds like any other man, that what wounds him and hurts his heart hurts others the same way, that he is no different, no better, no worse than any other human being on the planet. Hence, he's developed this enlarged understanding about what the ego is and how he operates in the world with concern and interest in others. What I do to the earth, what I do to another, I do to myself. And it becomes not a philosophy, but a lived truth. as opposed to egos that are more structured, boundaried, haven't moved past that isolated perspective. They haven't moved into the 21st century with the quantum view of we are all one and nothing's really physical or boundaried.
Well, my hope is, and my expectation is that people will be watching this video in 50 or 100 years. We're going for something, we're looking at timeless truths.
Timeless truths. And it couldn't be, how can we address something if we don't see it?
Yeah.
How can we address the ego if the ego hasn't come up to be addressed? We've been red in the rainbow. We've been fish swimming in water going, I don't know what water is. It's like all of a sudden we look at this current situation, we go, oh my God, the ego functioning at a certain level of insecurity doesn't work anymore. I love the fact that we're where we're at, that we're seeing so plainly the shadow side of our own beings, the things that are messy that we really don't want to acknowledge and take and own up to. But we are all one under the skin. We're all the same.
Well, it does seem to me that humanity has arrived at a point in history. Maybe when I say a point, it may be a process that'll last 100 years or more.
Yeah.
But that we risk destroying ourselves as a species if we don't begin to understand in a deeper way who we really are.
Absolutely. That's why I wrote the book, Jeffrey. I didn't want to write about what I had come to know. I didn't want to set myself up as some sort of spiritual teacher. I didn't want to say any of this.
Yeah.
But Spirit just commanded that I do it because now is the time that we start getting a handle on who we really are and get a handle on the nature of the ego, how to evolve it. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is I'm very, very clear there are exercises we can train our perceptions to become more expanded and more inclusive rather than exclusive and boundaried.
If we go through life feeling threatened at the ego level, it's not a real threat because the ego, in effect, isn't a real thing.
No, it's not. It isn't. But we make it so.
Yes.
Hence the matrix.
Yeah.
We make the ego, we make the prison walls, we make our own story, and then we stick to it, not realizing that it is infinitely flexible and can be changed like that.
We live inside of a, I used the metaphor earlier, the prison of our own thoughts. And those thoughts are often fear and dependency and a sense of inadequacy and a desire to lash out, maybe a desire to control, to manipulate, to hurt others for our own self-aggrandizement.
Right. And what does that all go back to? The original message that I and you picked up when you first came into the world. I am physical, I am separate. And then unconsciously, if we don't teach this in schools, we don't teach kids how to think. Nobody talks about who are you? That's never asked. Yeah. And so this is the conversation. It has to come out in the mainstream. We have to be asking these things so that we are no longer boundaried. We're no longer threatened. We're knowledgeable. We know, oh, wow, I understand. I have an unconscious program running 24/7 that I am separate, therefore I'm alone and I'm scared and I'm vulnerable at a very unconscious level. I don't want to be like that. So I become a jerk because I'm so frightened and I've just got to create this castle wall around me to support my ultimate illusionary story.
Yeah. Well, Alan Watts, the philosopher, wrote a book once called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. It's as if there are many social pressures that society runs better if we're all good worker bees.
I suppose ignorance is not bliss.
Yeah.
At a certain level of development and human evolution, we can no longer afford ignorance. It has its own comfort level, but it's fascinating to me that we're entering a time of such activism in people's minds that we have to now get out and if we're going to make a change, we can't depend on our representative government. And I think this is a really healthy place to be, is that it's no longer about being represented by another person. It's time to stand up and represent ourselves. But stand up and represent ourselves from a knowledgeable viewpoint. Not just more, thunder and roaring and chest pounding and finger pointing. No longer coming from that fear-based isolation as an ego, but as a knowledgeable human being, knowing who we are, knowing the structure of the mind, where it comes from, how it develops, and how it can be expanded into a very wonderful, safe zone of inclusivity, where you're no longer a threat to me. You're my brother. You're my sister. You're my brother. I can depend on you. You are me.
What a beautiful note to end our discussion, Cate Montana. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. What a pleasure being here.
And thank you for being with us.